morning, everyone. Can you hear me online? So this is the second day of our retreat. First day was a bear, wasn't it? Always is. People falling asleep. Sort of discombobulated when we do the service. It's all kind of chaotic. So we practice together like this. So when you begin practice, we emphasize the mechanics, posture, breathing, how to work with the mind, shamatha, mindfulness, vipassana, mindfulness. So once you've got the mechanics down, then what is practice? What are we doing here? We have a bumper sticker on our front door that says wholeness, seeing wholeness where there is division. That's pretty good, huh? We used to have another bumper sticker that we don't have around anymore that said, honk if you don't exist. That's a good one for Chicago. So maybe we could frame practice or Zen training in terms of the three tenets. That's always a good place to start. We start with giving up fixed ideas, all kinds of attitudes, opinions, judgments, assumptions, beliefs. And then I think the heart of the practice comes down to bearing witness. What are we bearing witness to? Well, we're bearing witness to the wholeness of life, aren't we? At least we're trying, but that's not so easy to do, the wholeness of life. We usually pick and choose what part of the wholeness we want to bear witness to, and then the other part we avoid. And isn't that why we're here? To bear witness to the part we avoid. Isn't that why people come to Zen centers? Because avoiding the pain doesn't work. It just doesn't work. People don't come to Zen centers because they're overly joyful, and having wonderful experiences. People come to Zen centers because they're having a hard time. We look at any one of us deeply, you will see the wound in you, in me, in our mothers, in our fathers, in our ancestors. We carry this wound. It's not our fault. It's no one's fault. It's life. There's scars to living. And sometimes those scars happen when we're young and we don't have any agency over how to work with that. But there's no one to blame. Bearing witness isn't about trying to find who's at fault. It's not about fixing ourselves. It's about being with the pain. Look, if you get triggered during any of this, feel free to take care of yourself, okay? You can go fix a cup of tea. Or if this gets to be too much, you can leave. It's all right. You have my permission. Please take care of yourself. We've all been beaten up by life. We've all been betrayed. Some of us have been abused. Life isn't fair. Life isn't just. You bear witness to the wholeness of life. You bear witness to the good, bad, and the ugly, the joys and the sorrows. The good news in all of this is that we don't really come to compassion without owning our suffering. We don't find this bodhicitta, this sad and tender heart, without being close to our own grief. And there's bodhicittas always here. No matter how high you build the wall to try to keep the pain out, there's always a crack in the wall. And that's how bodhicitta always gets in, through the crack. Your sad and tender heart. We're all vulnerable. We all feel inadequate. So we all have this sad and tender heart. It's been broken. And when we bear witness, I think we're bearing witness to the pain that opens our heart. And either the pain will make you hard, it will harden your heart, or it will soften it. And it's really up to each of us which one we want to do. I was thinking the other day how it is that we are so divided. And I was watching a documentary of Ken Burns' documentary on Vietnam, and reliving those days that I grew up in as a teenager, and it was a really hard time, an awful lot of pain. A lot of division. I was thinking how odd this thing is that we do, being victims, feeling like a victim, being victimized by life or by somebody, or feeling victimized. and how easy the victim can become the perpetrator. It's really the line between the two is slippery. The victim can become the perpetrator really easily, and the perpetrator can feel victimized. So what's the difference? They're both suffering. And then there's the savior wanting to save one or the other. It's all disempowering. It's all pain. It's all suffering. Broken wings, broken bones. We don't really find compassion without opening to our own pain. And I think that's what we're here for. That's what practice is about, is bearing witness to all of ourselves, the whole thing. The parts that scare us. We all have neighborhoods that we don't want to visit. We all have shadows. We all have disowned parts of ourselves. We're all capable of being awful. And we have been. Not only have we suffered, but we've given it out to others too. We've reacted. And at the end of the day, you're stuck with yourself. It doesn't matter who you blame. It doesn't matter about getting even, because you still, at the end of the day, you're stuck with yourself. It's not fair. Life isn't fair. And you might think that your suffering is horrible, and it might be. But isn't it odd that that's how we come to love, is through our suffering? You don't know what love is if you haven't suffered. You haven't loved someone unless you've seen their wound too. We can see it in each other if we look closely. It's there. And there's nothing the matter with that. That's part of the wholeness of life. And so when we bear witness to all of ourselves, the joys and the sorrows, then loving action is what arises. Bodhicitta, this sad and tender heart. Raw, tender heart. And how often do we wall that off and try to close that off because it scares us. Pain is scary. It's overwhelming. The grief feels like there's no bottom to the well. If you go down that well, you won't return. You'll completely lose it. Everything will fall apart. Let everything fall apart. Hasn't it already? So we have various ways of talking about suffering. it's useful to understand we suffer and we create suffering too. And part of practice is to understand, you know, there's a kind of suffering that life brings that we have no control over. We're all getting older. Our bodies start to ache, and there's nothing you can do about that. And we can get sick, and eventually we're going to die. That's not the kind of suffering I'm talking about. That's actually just life. It's our reaction to that that creates the suffering. It's our avoidance of that that creates the suffering. So in Buddhism, we have three kinds of suffering. You know, we're really good at talking about suffering in Buddhism. We analyze it down to each, you know, to 108, a list of 108 kinds of unwholesome afflictions. So the first kind of suffering is suffering of physical suffering, which is basically based on the senses, and we all know what that kind of suffering is. If you've been sitting here the first day, you already had that kind of suffering, the discomfort in your body, the busyness in your body that doesn't want to sit still. How did I get myself, why did I sign up for this retreat? The sitting period is too long. Kind of looking out of the corner of your eye to see if Hogetsu is going to ring the bell. Suffering, physical suffering. We all have physical suffering. You're not going to avoid it. If you're born, you're going to die. As soon as you're born, you're already dying. And then the second suffering is the suffering of change. We don't like change too much. There's no way to avoid change, and yet we create suffering by avoiding change. We try to hang on to something. If there's something pleasant, we want it to last, but it doesn't. And if something is unpleasant, we want to get rid of it as soon as possible. So everything's changing. Every moment is new. Everything. You can't step in the same river twice. And yet, if we don't look at our life with curiosity, if we don't really inquire about what's here and how we're here, then we make all kinds of general assumptions about things that aren't accurate, that don't work very well. Much of it comes from our culture, the conventional materialistic culture, which is upside down, creates a lot of stress, tension, a lot of violence, meanness, hatred, prejudice. Horrible. And then we have what's called the pervasive suffering of our conditioning, which is the deeper, that's the deeper arrow that penetrates, almost always based on emotional, cognitive afflictions. We create the suffering by grasping onto emotions, taking them too personally, too much drama, overreacting, hanging on to a thought, an idea, a judgment, an attitude. All those afflictions are the ways that we create more suffering than we need to. And Buddhism is saying we don't need to do that. We absolutely don't need to do that. We can learn how we do that, and then we can stop doing it. mostly. So, there's nothing the matter with having a point of view. It's if you find yourself getting really righteous and angry about it, then you probably should take a look at why you're doing that, why you're having that kind of reactivity. There's another way of thinking about suffering, which I think is helpful. It's called the three lords of suffering, the three lords of materialism. And so the first lord of materialism is the lord of form. It has to do with all the ways we look at the external world around us. And we have all kinds of ways of distracting ourselves from what we're experiencing in this moment by preoccupation with devices, the internet, social media, our cell phones, TV, videos, TikTok, the news, all kinds of external forms that we can use to avoid the pain, avoid what is here that's uncomfortable. And it's so easy to do now. You just feel a slight amount of discomfort and your cell phone is seconds away. You just reach for the cell phone, fill in that gap. And then there's the Lord of Speech, which has to do with all of the isms, all of the beliefs we have, beliefs about all kinds of stuff, politics, government, people, prejudice, all kinds of ways we get stuck with beliefs. People will kill for a belief. Religion can be a dogma. Ideologies, we solidify these beliefs into something that is rigid, creates a lot of suffering. Try to legislate political correctness. See where that's getting us. Yeah, it's really working out well. And then what's the third one? Mind. The third lord of materialism is the mind. That's more subtle. More subtle. We can be attached to experiences, we can be attached to states of mind, we can be attached to spiritual states of breakthroughs, openings, transcendent experiences. We can be attached to enlightenment. We can be attached to almost any state. And that in Zen we call this a makyo. And sometimes we have koans where the student's out walking with a teacher and the student is going on and on about how wonderful their experience was, and the teacher will say something, that's good, you'll get over that soon. Just keep going. This too will pass, because that's impermanent. But that's more subtle. We can hang on to these experiences or want them. So we have so many ways of talking about suffering. I can't believe it. We have the 6 realms of suffering too. The six realms are six ways that six styles that we're so creative. We have so many ways of suffering. Isn't it amazing? We can six styles of suffering. There's and they're all the Tibetans tend to literalize these, but they make a lot of sense just psychologically too. That we can be in any realm. We can be in all six realms in the course of a day. It's not hard to do. So the hell realm, and each realm is kind of associated with a major emotion, which becomes a kind of klesha or an affliction. So the hell realm is associated with anger, hot and cold anger, freezing the space. A lot of suffering in the hell realm, self-destruction. A lot of times part of our suffering is that we're really harsh with ourselves. We don't allow any gentleness to be. We think loving kindness is silly. We think it's weak to have compassion for ourselves. That's the insanity of our culture, right there. That being vulnerable is weak. So you have to be harsh and hard. That's insane. And then the animal realm is characterized by denial. Kind of just put your head in the sand and try to, everything around you is just not going well. So you just put your head in the sand and don't pay any attention to any of it. Forget about it. We can do that too. We can dull ourselves down, and we all do, because the times are fraught with uncertainty and fraught with disruption and chaos. So we all know that kind of suffering we do to contract and dull ourselves down. We've done it during the pandemic. I bet you've all done it. I've done it. Anyone here hasn't done that? Know what I'm talking about? The trouble with that is you dull down the pain, but you also dull down the joy. You dull down the love. And that's what we're wanting. What we really long for is compassion, bodhicitta. Then what's the next one? Hungry ghost. Oh my God. Hungry ghost. You're all probably familiar with the hungry ghost. We do gave sweet nectar to feed the hungry ghosts, and we're all hungry ghosts too. We're all addictive in some ways. We're all a hungry ghost has long, skinny neck, big head, bloated stomach. So when they try to eat, they can't. They can't swallow. It's painful to swallow the food, right? You get the metaphor? Always eating, but never satisfied. Never satisfied. You don't know where the nourishment actually is. That we're eating the wrong things, drinking the wrong thing, drinking too much of the wrong thing, putting a needle in ourselves, all kinds of addictions, a lot of suffering there, a lot of suffering. And not only do we create suffering for ourselves, but we create a lot of chaos around ourselves. It contributes to other people's suffering when they're around us. talking with Melanie the other day. She says the main drug in Chicago now is heroin. And apparently they cut heroin with fentanyl. I don't understand why they do that, but the fentanyl is seriously toxic, and there's a lot of, it's, I don't know the statistics, but I've heard that fentanyl is one of the biggest causes of death now, overdose with, a lot of young people are overdosing on fentanyl. So our whole culture is a hungry ghost culture. And then the human, so that hungry ghost culture is based on grasping. There's always desire, just grasping and trying to have and never being satisfied. Never, never. And then the human realm is said, according to the Tibetans, the human realm is the best realm to be in because there's some curiosity about the suffering, but not too much. But at least there's some doubt in the human realm, which that's kind of like the crack in the wall. But the human realm is characterized by being really picky and choosy and fussy with all the things we like and don't like, the style of our music and how we play our music loud when we want to impress somebody, the things we like, the kind of food we like, the food we don't like. We're very picky and fussy in the human realm. And then there's, what's that? That's 4, 5 is the jealous gods. And the jealous gods is based on comparing, competing. You're always comparing yourself to somebody else, and you don't quite measure up to if you want to make yourself miserable, just compare yourself to other people. Someone wrote a book on that, how to be miserable. When you were 5 years old, what were you doing? Compare yourself to Mozart. What was he doing? He was 5 years old. Probably wrote his first symphony when he was 5 years old. You want to be miserable? Compare yourself to Mozart. So the jealous God is a lot of suffering, a lot of competition. And then there's the heaven realm, which you would think would be a good realm to be in, but actually it's not. It's also suffering. Although when you're in the heaven realm, you're not necessarily suffering. It's characterized by absorption. We might say samadhi, when we're in sesshin, is a kind of heaven realm. It's a state that we like. It's very enjoyable. It's worth having. I'm not discounting samadhi. Samadhi is really important, but that absorption doesn't last. It's great when you're in retreat and you have this strong samadhi, and it's very useful and clarifying. But wait a couple of weeks and it will be gone. You can't hang on to that either. And that's why the heaven realm is actually a kind of suffering, because when we're in the heaven realm, we want to stay there. Because in the heaven realm, there's not a lot of suffering, but not a lot of compassion either. You know, when you go in those art galleries where they have the dolphins jumping through rainbows and they're painted on velvet, they're all like sickeningly sweet. That's the heaven realm. Really sweet and sickening, sentimental. So the point of all this is that if we understand our suffering, then we have some agency about how how to not do that. And a lot of the Buddhist teachings are about how we create the suffering. So it's said in Buddhism that if we see things clearly, we say that reality is empty. We have this word emptiness. I think now Upaya translates it as boundlessness. Shunyata is the Sanskrit word. And it's maybe the most important teaching in Buddhism. So the nature of reality is empty. It means it's empty of self exist. Everything is empty of a isolated identity in self. Nothing exists. Nothing here exists by itself, including us. We are all interconnected. We aren't solid. We aren't objects, although we perceive the world as objects and we objectify the external world as forms and objects, but that's a misperception. This isn't solid, this cup. It feels solid in my hand, but if I drop it on the floor, it's going to break. It might break. No, the Heart Sutra that we chant each morning, it's all about this reality. Everything, nothing exists unto itself. So one of the ways, Buddha taught about this in many different ways because he was skillful about the way he would teach, but one of the teachings is called the dependent origination, which is the 12 nidanas, and it starts with ignorance. So if we are ignorant about the nature of reality, then we are going to perceive ourselves as separate and alone, a separate, lonely self, isolated unto ourselves without any connection with the world around us. This is a setup for suffering. So the first nidana is always delusion, ignorance, and that sets up all the others. But the second one is really interesting. It's called sankhara. The sankhara is often translated as volitional formation. So the idea is that if we don't see things here clearly, then we start things in action, which creates karma, which creates the wheel of suffering, which we call samsara. But the other translation of sankhara is interesting and important. It's the way things are compounded. It's the way things are formulated, and that word, formulated, is a really important word in Buddhism. We're all formulated. We aren't solid. We have many parts. You know, the chair I'm sitting on has a cushion that I'm sitting on. It has metal and material, and its parts are glued together. It's compounded. Everything is compounded. Trees are compounded. Flowers. You and I, we're compounded. We call it the 5 skandhas. We are empty of a isolated, separate self. That doesn't exist. You can't find it. If you really look, you won't be able to find yourself in that way. And we say in Buddhism, to really see this clearly is the way that we heal the suffering, because we stop trying to we stop trying to protect and hold on to our territory, because there's nothing to hang on to. There's no ground here. And that, from the ego's point of view, that's really scary, but it's also enormously liberating. So, there's this famous saying of Trungpa's, which I really love. He says, enlightenment is the plane is going down. It's going down. Captains, saying over the plane's going down. And the bad news is you don't have any parachutes. And the good news is there's no ground. There's no ground to emptiness. It's not something. That's the point. It's not anything. So we're always looking at the play, but we don't look behind the stage to see what makes the play happen. We don't want to look there. It's too much work. It's like we want to be in the play, and we hope it has a good ending. But it could be a tragedy. We don't look behind. And so when we are practicing, the other kind of meditation in our Zen tradition, in the Soto tradition, is called shikantaza. So I think when we are bearing witness in the way that we do when we sit here, when you let go of counting the breath and you're not particularly doing any method anymore, you're just sitting, and everything is sitting. Pain is sitting. The broken heart is sitting. The grief is sitting. Everything is sitting. And we call this turning the light inward. Turning the light inward. And when you turn the light inward, you're opening to that, your good heart. It's always here. You can't lose it. You can't gain it. You can't possess it. It's just here, waiting for you to notice that you have this richness. You are intrinsically awake. You can't gain it. You can't win it. You can't lose it. Well, we might call this formless awareness, formless form. We're not distracted. We're not objectifying the world. It doesn't mean that there aren't hard things with edges, but once you see things as being self-existing and not compounded, you start the whole wheel of samsara. And once when there's a world of, when there are objects out there, they have corners and sharp edges, and they create conflict and they create struggle. And struggle is what we do that creates suffering, the way we struggle to be on top, struggle to be in control, struggle to keep it together, struggle to show a good face, struggle to put another happy cat on your social media site. Cute cat. So once we have four objects, and once we're an object, then there's birth and death, and there's fear, hope and fear. All the dualities enter in. And the biggest duality that we struggle with is being and non-being. birth and death, the fear of our dissolution. But if you see the nature of reality clearly, that everything here is empty of a self-existing self, including yourself, then suffering is empty too. Suffering has no basis. And that's why we say to see this reality clearly is to heal, to be liberated from suffering. Because there's no longer birth and death either. We say it's unborn. We're unborn. We are the deathless. But that's the biggest fear, isn't it, that we have? Is that we're going to die and we're somehow going to disappear. So I think it's good to start a retreat with bodhicitta. It's good to end the retreat with bodhicitta, because we need some love. We need a lot of love, and we're longing for it. No, the world we're living in is mean and cruel, and it's not only that we suffer from emotional and cognitive and conceptual thoughts. We also have moral suffering. And maybe that's the most painful, is that we actually are morally abused by the thoughtlessness and the ignorance and the arrogance in samsara, in the world around us that we see every day. We see people behaving poorly. It's a kind of moral abuse, really painful. We may not even notice it. But we start shutting down. We start closing off. And we have so many ways to do that. And I think why I'm so grateful for this practice is it allows me to bear witness to the ways I do that. And I find when I'm sitting, it's not a technique. I'm not practicing, and I'm just bearing witness to the wholeness of life. And I think that's what we do in practice. We bear witness, and then if you're brave enough to do this, which you are, or else you wouldn't be here, then you find that your heart starts to crack open. And this is what we long for. It's this sad and tender heart. It's not weak, it's strong. It's not weak, it's courage. It's not weak, it's bravery. The bravery of a spiritual warrior to show up here with your kind and tender heart. And so the last thing I'll close with is there's another teaching which is really wonderful in Buddhism called the 4 Brahma Viharas, which are the four experiences we all want to have all the time, if possible. But of course we can't. But the wonderful thing about the 4 Brahma Viharas, the first one is essentially loving kindness. And everything comes from loving kindness. If we don't have goodwill, if we're not able to be gentle with ourselves and kind, then nothing comes from that. That's we just dry up. There's no inspiration possible, no creativity. We're just pushing, struggling. So the loving kindness is the key. So you start with goodwill, and then the second Brahma Vihara is compassion. If you have goodwill in your heart, if you have your good and tender, you have your good heart, if you're sincere and genuinely yourself, you're willing to trust being yourself, then when that goodwill in you experiences suffering, it brings forth compassion. Has to. Has to. And then when that goodwill experiences happiness, someone else's happiness, it experiences empathic joy, which is an also wonderful experience of abundance and gratitude and celebration, joy. And then the final, just to, because have a little redundancy built into the whole thing, is the last Brahma Vihara is equanimity. In case those first three don't work, you can always fall back on equanimity to keep you in the middle path, you know. It'll keep you having even keel. Just stay in the middle. Don't reach for the extremes. Stay down, just go right down the middle way and go straight on, as one of our koans says. And, you know, be, as Hui Nong says, you know, just be straightforward, be genuine, be sincere. So that's probably enough for any questions or thoughts, or we could have a little discussion. Linda, want to get the other microphone there, so you can pass it around.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can say this in a few minutes, but I remember early on when I had a bit of an interest in Buddhism. I read a book about it. I don't remember the book, but it talked about Shakyamuni Buddha sat under a tree and he was going to sit there until he became enlightened. All of a sudden, one day he stood up, said he was enlightened, and what did he find out? He said, "Life is suffering." And my reaction to that was, damn.
After all that.
Like, really? This is the first time somebody actually hit the nail on the head, you know? And I thought, I got to find something out about these people. And it was, briefly as I can, things that I've learned along the way is suffering is the equalizer. It is the great equalizer. Talk about equanimity. It's suffering, because everybody has it. We're all miserable on some level, you know? But we tend to use it almost as combatively. Sometimes a simple statement like you think you suffer? Let me tell you something, girlfriend, if I got a story for you. And so, you know, my suffering is greater than yours, or worse yet, you caused mine. Now I'm going to cause yours, which kind of leads to wars and all kinds of interesting things. If we could see that suffering is the one equalizer, it's the one thing that everybody has in common. And then, I don't know, somehow it's so slightly different than interdependence. If interdependence says you are a part of me and I'm a part of you, then how can I not help you? You're part of me. But the suffering is, you know, we both have misery. Maybe we can help each other. Maybe we can look at each other. What did you just say about the bumper sticker? Oh, a unity in place of division, you know. So that's how I see suffering. It's the great equalizer among us. And Buddhism is cool.
Anyone else? Okay. Yeah.
I hope I'll be able to express it, but what you just said, like about suffering and bearing witness.
Is what?
Bearing witness to suffering, right? So I don't know, maybe I'm at the start of this way, that's why I have those questions, but I mean, is there a limit to bearing witness to somebody's suffering when you have your own suffering? Like, does that mean that bearing witness, like what you said about, like, there's a person, oh, let me tell you about mine, and you have to be there for them all the time and listen to that suffering and kind of forget yours? Like, what is the route of this bearing witness?
Well, we're not talking about being codependent with someone. There's a place for tough love. There's a place for being honest with someone you love. If they're being fishy or doing something that's, indulgent in some way. But I think self-compassion is part of compassion. I mean, you can't have compassion for other people without having compassion for yourself. So the two have to go together, and part of taking care of yourself as a being on the path is drawing boundaries and saying no when you don't overextend yourself, that you take care of yourself so that you can do this practice and that you can be of service to fulfill your bodhisattva vows to help others. It's not skillful if you're not taking care of yourself. You're actually not skillful, because if you burn out, it's, I think the metaphor is, they always say, when the plane's going down and you grab for the oxygen mask, you don't give it to the other person first, you put it on yourself first so that you can help the other person. And so it's like that. You have to, this idea that compassion is about denying yourself your own nurturing or kindness or wellness, it's a kind of a religious notion that's not helpful. Often when they talk about compassion in a religious context, it's, look how great Mother Teresa was, how you should be like that too. But none of us would measure up to Mother Teresa. So if we're comparing ourselves to her, naturally we feel awful and guilty because we're not that loving. None of us are gonna measure up to that. So that kind of teaching about compassion is not helpful. It just creates a lot of guilt and second guessing ourselves again. So there's two kinds of compassion. There's what's called absolute bodhicitta, which is when you really see the empty nature of reality. The compassion is there already. And then there's a kind of conditional bodhicitta where there's things we can do to practice mindful training and slogans we can use and vows we can take to help encourage us to be more compassionate in a kind of a relative way. And the two go together. Yeah. So I think when you're really bearing witness, you are opening your heart and you're finding that compassion is already here. And when you have it for yourself, you naturally have it for other people. But it's not idiot compassion either. You don't let people walk all over you just because you have an open heart. Huh? You don't let people abuse you because you drop boundaries and you take care of yourself. And you might want to take care of others too around you. And you might want to take care of someone when they're not taking care of themselves. You might need to tell them something that's tough. You see them hurting themselves. Well, then as a friend, it's almost your obligation to find the right time and the right way to sit down and say something to them so they might hear it. But once you start trying to save them, then it doesn't work, right? We translate the Bodhisattva vow, I vow to save all sentient beings, but that word save is a little easy to misunderstand. So when we chant the vow here, we say, creations are numberless, I vow to free them. This comes up a lot when we talk about compassion. People wonder, how can I be compassionate without being kind to myself? It's not possible. You have to. That's why I said the four Brahma Viharas is a really good teaching, because if you have the goodwill in your own heart and you're taking care of yourself, then naturally you find that you're empathizing and being compassionate and caring about other people too, because you care about yourself. There's no martyr complex here. There's no poverty mentality at all. It's a sense of abundance and gratitude and joy that comes out of this. Even the Buddha suffered. We don't think of it like the Buddha's story is often told in a very unrealistic way. You know, you hear the stories about Buddha's birth, and his mother died when he was 7 days old. 7 days old. And the stories are all mythologized. So and the baby Buddha walks out. He can't even walk then, but he slowly walks out, says some really wise thing like, above the heaven and below the earth, I alone am the only honored one. Really? He said that when he was 7 days old? I don't think so. I think he was crying. Lost his mother. He was traumatized. The Buddha was traumatized. And if you don't think he was, look what he did later in his life when he left his family. He just had a daughter that was born. He left that to go live in a forest with a bunch of, mangy old yogis that were all miserable and acting out their own trauma. And that didn't work for him either. He almost killed himself. And the point where he had the turning point, and the way you can tell stories in different ways, but the way I like to tell the story is it's not working for him. This aesthetic, this self-hatred was his trauma. That's what trauma is like. It's a kind of self-hatred of myself. No self-worth at all. So I'm going to just beat myself up. And that's what he was doing. He was acting out his trauma. And then he had a memory. He had a memory. It wasn't working. He has this memory of when he was a young boy and he was sitting under an apple tree. His father was out working in the fields and the sun was shining on his skin and he felt joy. And because Shakyamuni was a curious person and extraordinary, he thought, I have this joy, but it wasn't dependent on anything like happiness. It didn't depend, it just came up. It was like, where did it come from? And he thought, that's really interesting. I had this joy, this experience. It's not based on any of my senses. Oh. So now he's starting to think, well, there's something to that. And now this, as a story, so I like to tell the story. This girl in the village has a dream. And in the dream, it says to go milk some cows, take this milk and give it to the first person she sees in the forest. And the wonderful thing about this is she actually acts on that. I mean, how many people would do that? She actually trusts her unconscious. And in the dream, it says, go milk 100 cows, collect that milk and feed it to 10 cows, milk those cows and feed it to one cow and milk that cow and take that. Now, you get it? It's very rich milk. It is like, and she takes that, and the first person she sees is Shakyamuni Buddha, and he receives it. He takes it. If you're a psychologist, you would get the behind this is the mother, the tits. She's milking the mother, and he gets his mother back, and getting his mother back, he's healed. He's healing his trauma. The opening to emptiness, the opening to spaciousness is not just empty, it's full. It's abundance. He's trusting his mother. He found his mother. And in that, he is healed of his trauma, and now he can sit down, and he proceeds to sit until he has his great awakening. But that was the turning point, was he actually decided, and all of his compatriots in the forest were all judging him and saying, oh, he's really lost it now. He's indulging, he's drinking milk raw. Oh my gosh, that's how horrible. He's really degenerate, So they're all judging him. And it didn't matter anymore to him because he realized that the healing was in the taking the milk, taking care of himself. And then he had to figure out his own kind of therapy, which was mindfulness. learning how to be with his pain without pushing it away, without grabbing onto something, a kind of bare attention that we teach in all of the mindfulness training that we teach here. It's about having a little distance from your, not disowning your emotion, but being able to watch it. And he figured that out, and he gave it to us, which is wonderful. But I think it's very helpful to see the Buddha was very human, like us, and he had his own suffering in spades. Unfortunately, he figured something out. I think that's helpful to see that he wasn't just some hero that was born, came out of the womb and saying all these wise things. He struggled too. Yeah. So the key is of being kind and gentle to ourselves. It all starts there. And we're often, when we're in the grip of suffering and trauma, we're often very, very harsh to ourselves. We direct the anger inward. Addicts do it all the time. When in the grip of extreme suffering, that's kind of how we get stuck. So the kind of need to forgive ourselves, and to be kind and gentle. And that's how we start to work with, heal our own aggression, our own, we all have a lot of anger and aggression, irritable, grumpy and irritable, especially in the afternoon sit. Okay? Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Okay, then I think we'll break for lunch. So we'll return at 3 o'clock this afternoon.